Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. So this is going to be the first of many videos of this kind where I'm going to be going into depth on the ideas which I've presented about my books. I'll be going over different chapters, different chapter reviews, well not really reviews, more explanations of my ideas, because the ideas which I present within these books are fairly dense, I would say, especially my first book. My first book is only 100 pages and every idea is very complex and cannot really be condensed very much more than it is already. So here I'm going to try and explain the ideas in more simple terms. If you want to help out me, my writing on this channel, you can buy a book. I've linked the links to buy the books down in the description, or you could just read the book off archive.org, I think is the name of it, which I've also linked down in the description. Or you could listen to the audiobook, which I've already uploaded before, like a day before, maybe on the day, it depends when I get this out. This is all going to be a part of a bigger book. All of these books, I'm going to write maybe 10, 9, 10, 11 maybe books, and they're all going to be different parts of a bigger book called Existence and Its Consequence, and that's going to be out, I don't know, in like a year, maybe longer, because I have to still write the books. I've done with about 3 of the books so far. I'm done with about 2 of the books so far, sorry, and I'm currently in the process of writing the 3rd one. So again, if you want to help out the channel, you can donate or you can buy a book. If you really want to help me out, if you're in university or you have somebody who you know is interested in philosophy, buy the book, give it to them, see what they have to say about it, and then come back to me and tell me what they thought about it. That would be very helpful. But the main thing now, the books are as cheap as I could make them on Amazon, because I want to get my ideas out there rather than getting money from my ideas, right? Because what I want in the end is something that money cannot buy, if I'm going to be honest. So yeah, let's get into this book. So we'll start with a bit of a preface before the preface, I guess you could say. So the reason why I wrote this book, or the big thing which this book is about progress and regress, or progression and regression, and how in order to have progress you have to have regress, and how both of these ideas cannot exist without one or the other. So are we moving forward in society or are we moving back? In my opinion, we're doing neither, we're just spinning. But we're going to get onto that in the 3rd chapter. Let's start with the 1st chapter now. But that is the whole overarching idea of the book. So let's go to the preface, in which I talk about the king, King Eversixton. So I'm not going to say his name because I pronounce it weirdly. So I'm just going to call him the king. So the king had always been graced by the goddess Demeter. However, when he decided to chop down the tree, he relinquished, or he showed that he did not acknowledge the gift which Demeter had given to him. He'd always been graced throughout his life, the king. He'd been given all these riches, all this grace from the goddess Demeter. But when he cut down that tree and said there are no gods, there is no one above me, effectively, he is saying that because he is so mired in grace, I guess you could say, that there is nothing beyond grace. He cannot be without this grace. He is the grace. The grace is because of him, right? And then Demeter tells the nymph to go and send the goddess of lack, and then obviously he dies because of it. He eats himself, he gorges himself on himself. So what does this mean? This is an example of hierarchy and the king not understanding hierarchy. He thought that there was only light and no darkness, and when he realized that there was darkness, he was driven mad by the existence of the darkness, mad by the existence of the palatability of himself, by the existence of hunger, by the existence of being insatiable or insatiated. So this goes more directly to the idea of people thinking there can be victory without loss, or people who have been mired in victory not knowing the existence of loss, right? You'll often talk to people and then they'll say, oh, I don't understand how somebody can't do X. I don't understand how somebody can't do Y. This is a similar sort of idea, because they're so mired in victory, they cannot comprehend the existence of defeat. And they think that victory is of their own superiority, is of their own manifestation. And because of this, when they experience defeat, eventually it drives them mad, it drives them insane. And often it can drive them to become deathly insane, to see themselves, as I said in the book, to find themselves both, I think I said insatiable and palatable, or something like that. Both hungry and palatable, I think I said. So this is the idea of hierarchy. When people don't understand that there's hierarchy, and they realize that there's hierarchy, that there are lesser, there are greater, there is just not the greater which is them. then such existence can drive themselves to be mad. This is not the only interpretation which you can get from this story, but this is the main one which I'm trying to get across. You could get different interpretations, and you could argue that they are equally as valid at getting the point home of hierarchy, and I would say there is, because I chose it for many different reasons. For example, the idea of the goddess of plenty and the goddess of lack, a dichromatic idea. You could say, you could infer some stuff from there. You could say a lot of stuff about this beginning story, but there's a lot of stories throughout the book. This is the beginning one, this is the one I quite like, and this is the one that has a lot of meaning, a lot of different interpretations behind it, and I want people to read it for themselves, because the story itself is fairly simple, and glean from that what the book is about, or read the book and then read the story back to themselves and then understand, the story is about this or about that. If people can get different interpretations from the story, I'm ecstatic. That's the ideal, that's the best thing that could happen. Now let's go on to the next part. We all want to be winners, but we all want to live in an equal world. We see all unfairness as a bad thing. When we say that something is unfair, we see it as almost as being tautological, with it being negative. Can you ever think of an example of when you said that something is unfair and you meant that as a good thing? Whenever we say something is unfair, the sport is unfair, the game's unfair, life is unfair, we mean it as a negative thing. We mean it as something which needs to be expunged from reality, which needs to be removed from reality in some way, shape or form. However, when we say this, we say it half-heartedly. We don't mean what we say in essence. That's the point I'm trying to bring home here. So let me give you another example. So let's say you are given any sort of field you want. So it could be swimming, it could be running, it could be racing, it could be flying, it could be driving, whatever you want to be. Would you want to be the winner? Choose whatever field you want, any field you want, any field which you care a lot about, and it is hierarchical in some way. So meaning, so there are winners and it's a competition, let's say, better wording, it's a competition. So would you want to be the winner? If the answer to this is yes, then you see the paradox which we have here. We want to live in an we want to live in a fair world. However, we want to also be winners. We want to be winners we want to be dominators. We want to be winners in an egalitarian society. We want to be victors in an equal world. This is our paradox, our confliction within ourselves. I said in the book, we are the battleground itself, because we are conflicted in these ideas. We want to win, but we want to live in an equal world, right? We want the world to be fair, but we want to be victors. We want unfairness in fairness, right? And that is a paradox which I'm bringing forward here in this beginning statement. So I'll quote something which I wrote in the book here for when we go on to our next point, as we're going on to our next point. So this is the next point. So is it that we are all born for a reason, that there is a sacred deed, a metaphysical journey upon which we should embark? Or is it that we are left in a metaphysical exile of sorts? It is a product of our endemic myopia, our inherited geocentrism, for if we, in our totality, reside at the centre, then how is it that up can be distinguished from down, or left differentiated from right? All movement in such a state would be seen as ascension, and such is why recent history is often recounted as movement forward. Such recountings, however, are infested with errors and misunderstandings, so I'll explain what I mean here. So let's imagine that you are compressed into a ball, right? So you compress yourself down into a ball, right? And all of your perceptions are compressed too. So all of your senses are compressed into the same ball. So you are a ball, and around this ball is all of your sense, all of your perception of taste, touch, smell, sight, hearing. It's all condensed around this ball. You are a ball of sense, effectively, right? So you are a ball, and all of your senses are all encompassing this ball, right? I hope you can imagine that. It's a bit of a weird, complex idea, but as I said, the book's weird and complex. So how would you distinguish? And let's now say that you reside at the center of the earth, right? So, so you are a ball, so you're a person compressed into a ball, you're surrounded by your own sense data, you're surrounded by your own senses, and you reside at the center of the world, center of the earth. So how would you differentiate up from down? It would be an impossible task. You couldn't know. In fact, there would be no up or down until you started to move. After you move, at that point you can tell which way is up and which way is down, because gravity will be pulling on you. In the same way, we only know where we are going as a consequence of continued movement. If the idea doesn't make sense, I will expand on it a lot in the 3rd chapter of the book, so wait until I make a video about that. But what I'm saying is, if you reside at the center of the earth, the only way how you know that you're moving forward, or that you're moving up, that you're ascending, let's say, is the gravity pulling you back. And because of this, this is how we differentiate movement forward. However, if we reside at the center of the earth, it doesn't matter which way we move. If we were to move, I can't even describe the directions because that's the whole point. But no matter which way we move, we're going to be moving forward. It's going to be forward movement. It doesn't matter if we're moving, I don't know, there's no direction, so I can't even describe it. This is why it's such a weird idea. But no matter which way we move, we're always going to be moving forward, because gravity is always going to, or ascending, I guess you could say, because gravity is always going to be acting against us. It's always going to be acting in our opposition, I guess you could say. And because of this, we can never, and because of this, if we were to expand this idea and take it out of its abstract form and apply it to history, recent history, let's say, this is why recent history is described as movement forward, because we're moving away, we're moving towards what? Away from what? It's unknown, right? And that's the point. Again, I'll make more evident in the 3rd chapter, as I said. So moving on to the next point in the 1st chapter. So this is where stuff gets fairly complicated. So to put it simply, everything that exists and that, so to put it simply, everything exists, and that which exists is everything. There is no non-existence. Such an idea cannot even be thought of, and because of this, there is no non-existence. There is also no movement, and because there is no non-existence, there is also no movement. As Gorgias puts it, what is cannot have come into being. If it did, it either came from what is or what is not, but it did not come from what is, since if it is existent, it did not come to be, but already is, nor from what is not, for non-existence cannot generate anything. So stuff cannot come into being. That's pretty much what Gorgias is saying. And now we get on to movement. So in order to move, one thing must come into being in one place and go out of being in another place. However, this simply isn't possible, as I said before, with the Gorgias statement. However, as I said before, also this is a complex idea. So I'll give you an example of how this paradox can actually come into play in a more real life example. So I'll give the example of the arrow paradox here. So the arrow paradox is quite simple but effective at driving home the point of non-movement. So this is a paradox. The arrow is flying through the air, and at any moment the arrow is standing still. The time it takes the arrow to fly is composed of nothing but moments. Therefore the arrow is always standing still, it never moves, and therefore the flying arrow is at rest. So the flying arrow is at rest. The statement in and of itself is a contradiction, however it is an existent property of the world. So it's paradoxical yet existent. So if something is paradoxical yet existent, there must be an error in the mechanism which we are using to discern the existence of this phenomena. However, the method which we're using to discern it is our own perception. So perception in this way must be false. Empiricism in this way must be false in some way. So let's go further on to the next point here. So if movement is false, then why do we perceive stuff to move? Well, this is because we can't do otherwise. We as sentient creatures have to perceive movement because movement is an essential, not an incidental lot of sentience, or the perception of movement also. Just like a triangle has to have 3 sides and a cube has to have 6 faces, all sentient creatures must move, and move volitionally. They must move of their own volition. That which does not volitionally move is not sentient or alive. So that's the next point there. So going on to the next point, we're getting into hierarchies now. So hierarchies are the inherent prescriptive, this is a quote from my book. Hierarchies are the inherent prescriptive nature of all things. All that is perceived can and is perceived as a position upon a hierarchy. All hierarchies are also bimodal in nature, with the greater presupposing the existence of the lesser, and the lesser presupposing the existence of the greater. Like a cube, there is no bottom without top. To go further, within a cube, it is nothing but the bottom which makes the top, and the top that makes the bottom. So, in order to move, we have to see the world as hierarchies. one thing being better or worse than another in a given field. That is what hierarchies are. They are bimodal, they are greater, they are lesser. That's the idea. And we internalize some of these hierarchies, and these hierarchies are known as social hierarchies. Let's say, for example, you're playing catch with someone. If you do a good job of playing the game, they will give you positive reinforcement. However, if you do a bad job, they will give you negative reinforcement. This reinforcement dictates to you the position on said hierarchy in which you stand, and to the extent the extent to which you internalize said hierarchy is how positive or negative you feel about that state, and the extent to which you will take actions to change that state, to ascend in the hierarchy. So this will be the last point made in the first chapter. Again, if you don't understand it, I would suggest reading the book itself. If you don't understand the book, I would suggest listening to what I'm saying now. If you don't understand both of them, you can always message me. I'll have my Discord link down in the description. If you don't understand anything, just message me directly from there. I'm not going to have a server for it. It's best for you just to talk directly to me about this kind of stuff. So this is the last point made in the first chapter, as I said. So there is one thing that isn't a hierarchy. That is categories. Categories are known innately. They comprise feelings of pleasure, pain, and neutrality, or to be more accurate, appetitive, aversive, and neutral events. For example, a cake being or tasting good, assuming that this is the first thing the person has ever eaten, does not necessitate a loser. Yet one can still say that the cake tastes good or bad. So this is an example of appetitive. This is an example of pleasure, right? You don't need to feel pain in order to know pleasure. However, to say it another way, you don't need any kind of reference in order to know whether the cake tastes bad or tastes good. This is an example of a category, or of categories. However, in order to tell if an object is tall or short, you must first have a reference. As such, this is an example of a category. You can't just say X object is tall or X object is short unless you have a reference to what another object is. You have to say short in comparison, tall in comparison. For example, is a person tall or short? Okay, so you can say that because you have the reference of a person. A person is your reference. You reference them to the average height of a person, and then you dictate, okay, then so this person is tall, this person is short because they are below the average height, this person is tall because they are above the average height. However, when it comes to feelings of pain or pleasure, we don't need a reference. You don't need a reference to know that putting your hand in fire hurts. You don't need a reference to know that a certain type of cake which you like, and presupposing you like it here, tastes good. You don't need to have a reference of what the negative is to know the positive, because there is positive and negative, right? If you can define a category in terms of positivity and negativity, then it is a category. If you can describe anything in terms of positivity or negativity, then it is considered to be a categorical in some way. However, if you can't describe it in those terms, you can only say its antonym, tall or short, then it will be a hierarchy most of the time. This is a loose rubric to go off of, but it works a lot of the time. So yeah, that's the first part of the summary of Dichromatic. I'm going to be doing one of these probably every other day, and we're going to get through hopefully all of the books which I'm going to write. If I take a long break, it's because I've gotten through the books and I'm writing a new one. So yeah, I might decompose them into shorter videos. So I might have like chapter 1 part 1 or chapter 2 part 5 or whatever it might be, right? Because for example, in my second book, I go into a lot of detail about different people and their different lives, and that's all in one chapter, so I might decompose that. But yeah, thank you a lot for watching this video, and I'll have another one in maybe like 2 days, 3 days or so for you. So thank you a lot for watching. I'll see you later.